Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig the hole. Sometimes it finds a way back to the surface, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. 67-year-old Vernice Talder thought she knew every inch of her Arizona mountain land. Then, a termite mound appeared near her cabin, 8 feet tall, grown in just 3 weeks. When she broke it open, she found an iron strongbox, buried 70 years ago. Inside were government documents, Cold War secrets, and names her father never spoke. Someone hid this box where no one would ever look, and now someone knows she found it. What was worth hiding for 7 decades? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in northern Arizona carries a particular crispness that never quite leaves, even in summer. At 7,000 feet, the ponderosa pines stand like silent sentinels, their bark smelling of vanilla and butterscotch when the sun warms them just right. Vernice Talder had been breathing this air for 67 years, and she could read the mountains the way some people read the morning paper. Her cabin sat in a small clearing 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that turned to mud in spring and dust in summer. The structure itself was a testament to careful craftsmanship, hand-hewn logs fitted with precision, a stone chimney that drew smoke perfectly, windows positioned to catch the morning light from the east and the sunset glow from the west. Her father had built it in 1946, returning from the war with hands that needed to work and a mind that needed silence. Vernice rose with the sun, as she had for decades. The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable. A cast-iron wood stove provided heat, though she rarely needed it before October. Solar panels her father had installed in the early 90s kept a few lights running and charged her phone, though reception was unreliable at best. Water came from a spring 200 yards uphill, gravity fed through pipes her father had laid when she was just a girl visiting for summers. She made coffee in an old percolator, the kind that burbled and hissed on the stovetop. While it brewed, she stepped onto the porch and surveyed her domain. The garden needed weeding. The fence along the southern edge sagged, where a pine had fallen against it last winter. The roof of the small shed, where she kept tools, would need patching before the monsoons arrived in July. These were the concerns that filled her days immediate, tangible, manageable. Her father had died in 1998, leaving her the cabin and 40 acres of mountain land. She'd been 40 then, already weary of the bureaucracy and politics of the Forest Service, where she'd spent 20 years as a smoke jumper. Jumping from plains into wilderness fires had suited her the solitude of the backcountry, the clarity of the mission, the respect earned through competence rather than small talk. When her father passed, she'd taken early retirement without hesitation and moved to the cabin full-time. The town of Pine Haven lay 12 miles down the mountain, population 847 if you counted the folks living in the scattered houses beyond the main street. Vernice made the trip once a month for supplies, sometimes twice if she needed hardware or had mail at the post office. She knew the important people by name, Loretta Brennan at the library, who ordered books for her and never minded late returns, Tom Vasquez at the general store, who kept a running tab and never pressed when money was tight, and old Eugene Chen at the post office, who'd been sorting mail since before Vernice was born. She had no use for more connection than that. People exhausted her with their need for explanation, their discomfort with silence, their assumption that solitude meant loneliness. She'd never been lonely, not in any way that mattered. The mountains provided everything she needed: space to think, work to occupy her hands, and the kind of peace that only comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Her father had understood that. Theodore Talder had been a man of few words, made even quieter by whatever he'd seen in Europe during the war. He'd built this cabin in a single summer, working from dawn until dark, refusing help from neighbors who offered. Vernice remembered visiting that first year, age 9, watching him measure and cut and fit each log with meticulous care. He taught her to read a level, to drive a nail straight, to respect wood and stone and the integrity of good work. On the cabin's south wall, mounted in a simple frame, hung his bronze star. He'd never spoken about what earned him that medal. When she'd asked as a teenager, he'd simply said, "I did my job. A lot of men didn't make it home. I did. That's all that matters." The finality in his voice had ended her questions. But there had been other signs of those years, the way he startled at sudden noises, the nights she'd heard him pacing the cabin floor when he thought she was asleep, the locked shed behind the house that he'd never allowed her to enter. "Just old tools and junk," he'd said. "Nothing you need to worry about." She'd believed him, or at least respected his boundaries enough not to push. After his death, she'd finally opened that shed. Inside, she'd found exactly what he'd promised: rusted saws, broken handles, coffee cans full of bent nails. She'd torn the whole structure down in 2001, using the salvageable lumber for firewood and hauling the rest to the dump. If there had been secrets there, she'd missed them entirely. Her mother had died when Vernice was 12, an aneurysm that took her in her sleep, quick and without warning. After that, it had been just Vernice and her father, spending summers at the cabin and winters in Phoenix, where she attended school. He'd worked as a civil engineer for the state, designing roads and bridges, bringing the same precise attention to blueprints that he brought to carpentry. Reliable work, honest work, nothing that would draw attention or require him to speak about the past. Vernice had inherited his self-sufficiency and his silence. She kept a garden that provided vegetables from May through October, tomatoes, squash, beans, peppers that thrived in the high-altitude sun. She knew how to can and preserve, how to make 20 pounds of dried beans and rice last through winter, how to hunt the deer that browsed near her property line each evening. A small chest freezer ran off her solar system, keeping meat and frozen vegetables through the cold months. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely varied. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the light change through the pines. Breakfast of oatmeal or eggs from the 3 chickens she kept in a wire run behind the cabin. Then, work, whatever the season and property demanded. In spring, clearing fallen branches and repairing winter damage. In summer, tending the garden and cutting firewood for the next year. In fall, harvesting and preparing for the cold. In winter, maintenance and the occasional trip on snowshoes to check her boundary markers. She read in the evenings by lamplight, mostly history and biography, books about people who'd done difficult things in difficult times. She had no television and wouldn't have wanted one. The silence of the cabin at night, broken only by the pop of settling logs or the distant call of an owl, was its own kind of entertainment. Loneliness, she'd learned long ago, was a choice. Some people couldn't stand their own company and filled every hour with noise and distraction. She'd never had that problem. Her own thoughts were company enough, and when they weren't, there was always work to be done. This particular morning in late April, she finished her coffee and walked the perimeter of her garden, noting what needed attention. The last frost had passed 2 weeks ago, and her tomato starts were ready to transplant. She'd need to reinforce the fence where rabbits had been testing for weak spots. The compost heap needed turning. But something else caught her eye, something that hadn't been there yesterday. Near the northeast corner of her property, perhaps 30 yards from the cabin, a mound of earth rose from the forest floor. At first glance it looked like a natural formation, but Vernice knew every contour of this land. That mound was new. She walked over to examine it more closely. The structure stood nearly 8 feet tall, roughly conical, built from soil and what looked like decomposed wood and plant matter. The surface was hard, almost cement-like, with a network of tiny holes and passages visible in places where the exterior had cracked. A termite mound, but termite mounds didn't grow to this size in northern Arizona, not in 3 weeks. And certainly not in pine forest, where the wood was too resinous for most termite species. She'd seen termite damage in fallen logs, small colonies that worked slowly over years, but nothing like this. She circled the mound slowly, frowning. The location troubled her as much as the size. It sat almost exactly between her cabin and the main path to her spring, as if something had been placed there deliberately, then built over. Vernice pressed her hand against the mound's surface, solid, sun-baked hard. She rapped her knuckles against it, dense, thick. This wasn't the work of weeks. This was the work of years, somehow hidden until now. But that made no sense either. She stood back, studying it from different angles. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines, and in that slanted light she saw something else, a slight depression in the ground around the mound's base, as if the soil had settled after being disturbed. Something was buried underneath this thing. Vernice walked back to her cabin with a growing sense of unease she couldn't quite name. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words he'd spoken near the end, when cancer had whittled him down to nothing. Some things stay buried for good reason, Vernie. Some secrets die with the people who keep them, and that's how it should be. She'd thought he was talking about the war, about whatever he'd seen or done in Europe. Now, looking back at that impossible mound rising from her land, she wondered if he'd meant something else entirely. The cabin felt smaller when she stepped back inside, the walls closer together than they'd been an hour ago. She looked at the bronze star on the wall, at her father's service photo beside him at 23 in his uniform, solemn-eyed and straight-backed. A stranger wearing her father's face. She'd spent 27 years living on this land full-time, and 67 years knowing it in pieces. If something was buried here, if something had been hidden all this time, then her father had known about it, and he'd never said a word. Vernice poured herself another cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching that mound through the trees. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. By noon, it would be hot enough to make hard work uncomfortable. If she was going to deal with this thing, she'd need to do it soon. But something held her back, the memory of her father's warning, the strangeness of the mound's appearance, the unsettling feeling that once she started digging, she wouldn't be able to stop. She thought about calling the Forest Service, reporting some kind of invasive species or unusual pest activity. But what would she tell them? That a termite mound had appeared overnight on private land? They'd think she was a foolish old woman who couldn't tell the difference between new growth and something she'd simply never noticed before. No. Whatever this was, she'd handle it herself. That's what you did in mountains. You solved your own problems with your own hands and didn't go running for help at the first sign of trouble. Vernice set down her coffee cup and went to the shed for her pickaxe. The tool was old, but well-maintained, the hickory handle worn smooth by decades of use. Her father had taught her to care for tools the way a soldier cares for weapons, clean them, sharpen them, store them properly. Good tools last a lifetime. If you treat them right, he'd said, they'll be there when you need them. She needed them now. Walking back to the mound with the pickaxe balanced on her shoulder, Vernice felt the weight of more than just iron and wood. She was about to break open something that had been sealed, hidden, protected by earth and time and silence. Her father's warning echoed again. Some things stay buried for good reason, but Vernice had never been good at leaving mysteries alone. It was why she'd become a smoke jumper, the need to face fire directly, to walk toward danger rather than away from it, to see what waited on the other side of fear. She raised the pickaxe, aimed for a spot near the mound's base, and swung hard. The exterior shell cracked like pottery, fragments falling away to reveal the dark earth underneath. She swung again, opening a larger hole. The interior was hollow in places, full of tunnels and chambers. But there was something else, something that reflected the morning sun with a dull metallic gleam. Vernice lowered the pickaxe and knelt down, pulling away chunks of the mound's wall with her hands. The object underneath was man-made, square-edged, deliberately placed. An iron strongbox, rusted but intact, sealed with government stamps she recognized from her years in federal service. Her hands started shaking, but not from effort. She'd found something her father had buried, something he'd hidden so carefully that even nature had been recruited to keep it secret. And now, after 70 years of silence, the earth had given it back. The morning air in northern Arizona carries a particular crispness that never quite leaves, even in summer. At 7,000 feet, the ponderosa pines stand like silent sentinels, their bark smelling of vanilla and butterscotch when the sun warms them just right. Vernice Talder had been breathing this air for 67 years, and she could read the mountains the way some people read the morning paper. Her cabin sat in a small clearing 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that turned to mud in spring and dust in summer. The structure itself was a testament to careful craftsmanship, hand-hewn logs fitted with precision, a stone chimney that drew smoke perfectly, windows positioned to catch the morning light from the east and the sunset glow from the west. Her father had built it in 1946, returning from the war with hands that needed to work and a mind that needed silence. Vernice rose with the sun, as she had for decades. The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable. A cast-iron wood stove provided heat, though she rarely needed it before October. Solar panels her father had installed in the early 90s kept a few lights running and charged her phone, though reception was unreliable at best. Water came from a spring 200 yards uphill. Gravity fed through pipes her father had laid when she was just a girl visiting for summers. She made coffee in an old percolator, the kind that burbled and hissed on the stovetop. While it brewed, she stepped onto the porch and surveyed her domain. The garden needed weeding. The fence along the southern edge sagged, where a pine had fallen against it last winter. The roof of the small shed where she kept tools would need patching before the monsoons arrived in July. These were the concerns that filled her days immediate, tangible, manageable. Her father had died in 1998, leaving her the cabin and 40 acres of mountain land. She'd been 40 then, already weary of the bureaucracy and politics of the Forest Service, where she'd spent 20 years as a smoke jumper. Jumping from plains into wilderness fires had suited her the solitude of the backcountry, the clarity of the mission, the respect earned through competence rather than small talk. When her father passed, she'd taken early retirement without hesitation and moved to the cabin full-time. The town of Pinehaven lay 12 miles down the mountain, population 847, if you counted the folks living in the scattered houses beyond the main street. Vernice made the trip once a month for supplies, sometimes twice if she needed hardware or had mail at the post office. She knew the important people by name, Loretta Brennan at the library, who ordered books for her and never minded late returns, Tom Vasquez at the general store, who kept a running tab and never pressed when money was tight, and old Eugene Chen at the post office, who'd been sorting mail since before Vernice was born. She had no use for more connection than that. People exhausted her with their need for explanation, their discomfort with silence, their assumption that solitude meant loneliness. She'd never been lonely, not in any way that mattered. The mountains provided everything she needed: space to think, work to occupy her hands, and the kind of peace that only comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Her father had understood that. Theodore Talder had been a man of few words, made even quieter by whatever he'd seen in Europe during the war. He'd built this cabin in a single summer, working from dawn until dark, refusing help from neighbors who offered. Vernice remembered visiting that first year, age 9, watching him measure and cut and fit each log with meticulous care. He'd taught her to read a level, to drive a nail straight, to respect wood and stone, and the integrity of good work. On the cabin's south wall, mounted in a simple frame, hung his bronze star. He'd never spoken about what earned him that medal. When she'd asked as a teenager, he'd simply said, "I did my job. A lot of men didn't make it home. I did. That's all that matters." The finality in his voice had ended her questions. But there had been other signs of those years, the way he startled at sudden noises, the nights she'd heard him pacing the cabin floor when he thought she was asleep, the locked shed behind the house that he'd never allowed her to enter. "Just old tools and junk," he'd said. "Nothing you need to worry about." She'd believed him, or at least respected his boundaries enough not to push. After his death, she'd finally opened that shed. Inside, she'd found exactly what he'd promised: rusted saws, broken handles, coffee cans full of bent nails. She'd torn the whole structure down in 2001, using the salvageable lumber for firewood and hauling the rest to the dump. If there had been secrets there, she'd missed them entirely. Her mother had died when Vernice was 12, an aneurysm that took her in her sleep, quick and without warning. After that, it had been just Vernice and her father, spending summers at the cabin and winters in Phoenix where she attended school. He'd worked as a civil engineer for the state, designing roads and bridges, bringing the same precise attention to blueprints that he brought to carpentry. Reliable work, honest work, nothing that would draw attention or require him to speak about the past. Vernice had inherited his self-sufficiency and his silence. She kept a garden that provided vegetables from May through October, tomatoes, squash, beans, peppers that thrived in the high-altitude sun. She knew how to can and preserve, how to make 20 pounds of dried beans and rice last through winter, how to hunt the deer that browsed near her property line each evening. A small chest freezer ran off her solar system, keeping meat and frozen vegetables through the cold months. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely varied. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the light change through the pines. Breakfast of oatmeal or eggs from the 3 chickens she kept in a wire run behind the cabin. Then work whatever the season and property demanded. In spring, clearing fallen branches and repairing winter damage. In summer, tending the garden and cutting firewood for the next year. In fall, harvesting and preparing for the cold. In winter, maintenance and the occasional trip on snowshoes to check her boundary markers. She read in the evenings by lamplight, mostly history and biography, books about people who'd done difficult things in difficult times. She had no television and wouldn't have wanted one. The silence of the cabin at night, broken only by the pop of settling logs or the distant call of an owl, was its own kind of entertainment. Loneliness, she'd learned long ago, was a choice. Some people couldn't stand their own company and filled every hour with noise and distraction. She'd never had that problem. Her own thoughts were company enough, and when they weren't, there was always work to be done. This particular morning in late April, she finished her coffee and walked the perimeter of her garden, noting what needed attention. The last frost had passed 2 weeks ago, and her tomato starts were ready to transplant. She'd need to reinforce the fence where rabbits had been testing for weak spots. The compost heap needed turning, but something else caught her eye, something that hadn't been there yesterday. Near the northeast corner of her property, perhaps 30 yards from the cabin, a mound of earth rose from the forest floor. At first glance, it looked like a natural formation, but Vernice knew every contour of this land. That mound was new. She walked over to examine it more closely. The structure stood nearly 8 feet tall, roughly conical, built from soil and what looked like decomposed wood and plant matter. The surface was hard, almost cement-like, with a network of tiny holes and passages visible in places where the exterior had cracked. A termite mound. But termite mounds didn't grow to this size in northern Arizona, not in 3 weeks, and certainly not in pine forest, where the wood was too resinous for most termite species. She'd seen termite damage in fallen logs, small colonies that worked slowly over years, but nothing like this. She circled the mound slowly, frowning. The location troubled her as much as the size. It sat almost exactly between her cabin and the main path to her spring, as if something had been placed there deliberately, then built over. Vernice pressed her hand against the mound's surface. Solid, sun-baked, hard. She rapped her knuckles against it, dense, thick. This wasn't the work of weeks. This was the work of years, somehow hidden until now. But that made no sense either. She stood back, studying it from different angles. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines, and in that slanted light, she saw something else, a slight depression in the ground around the mound's base, as if the soil had settled after being disturbed. Something was buried underneath this thing. Vernice walked back to her cabin, with a growing sense of unease she couldn't quite name. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words he'd spoken near the end, when cancer had whittled him down to nothing. Some things stay buried for good reason, Vernie. Some secrets die with the people who keep them, and that's how it should be. She'd thought he was talking about the war, about whatever he'd seen or done in Europe. Now, looking back at that impossible mound rising from her land, she wondered if he'd meant something else entirely. The cabin felt smaller when she stepped back inside, the walls closer together than they'd been an hour ago. She looked at the bronze star on the wall, at her father's service photo beside him at 23 in his uniform, solemn-eyed and straight-backed. A stranger wearing her father's face. She'd spent 27 years living on this land full-time, and 67 years knowing it in pieces. If something was buried here, if something had been hidden all this time, then her father had known about it, and he'd never said a word. Vernice poured herself another cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching that mound through the trees. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. By noon, it would be hot enough to make hard work uncomfortable. If she was going to deal with this thing, she'd need to do it soon. But something held her back, the memory of her father's warning, the strangeness of the mound's appearance, the unsettling feeling that once she started digging, she wouldn't be able to stop. She thought about calling the Forest Service, reporting some kind of invasive species or unusual pest activity. But what would she tell them? That a termite mound had appeared overnight on private land. They'd think she was a foolish old woman who couldn't tell the difference between new growth and something she'd simply never noticed before. No. Whatever this was, she'd handle it herself. That's what you did in the mountains. You solved your own problems with your own hands and didn't go running for help at the first sign of trouble. Vernice set down her coffee cup and went to the shed for her pickaxe. The tool was old but well-maintained, the hickory handle worn smooth by decades of use. Her father had taught her to care for tools the way a soldier cares for weapons, clean them, sharpen them, store them properly. Good tools last a lifetime if you treat them right, he'd said. They'll be there when you need them. She needed them now. Walking back to the mound with the pickaxe balanced on her shoulder, Vernice felt the weight of more than just iron and wood. She was about to break open something that had been sealed, hidden, protected by earth and time and silence. Her father's warning echoed again. Some things stay, buried for good reason. But Vernice had never been good at leaving mysteries alone. It was why she'd become a smoke jumper, the need to face fire directly, to walk toward danger rather than away from it, to see what waited on the other side of fear. She raised the pickaxe, aimed for a spot near the mound's base, and swung hard. The exterior shell cracked like pottery, fragments falling away to reveal the dark earth underneath. She swung again, opening a larger hole. The interior was hollow in places, full of tunnels and chambers, but there was something else, something that reflected the morning sun with a dull metallic gleam. Vernice lowered the pickaxe and knelt down, pulling away chunks of the mound's wall with her hands. The object underneath was man-made, square-edged, deliberately placed. An iron strongbox, rusted but intact, sealed with government stamps she recognized from her years in federal service. Her hands started shaking, but not from effort. She'd found something her father had buried, something he'd hidden so carefully that even nature had been recruited to keep it secret. And now, after 70 years of silence, the earth had given it back. Vernice killed the lamps immediately and moved away from the window. She'd learned in her smoke jumper days how to move in darkness, slow, deliberate, hands extended to feel for obstacles. Her cabin was small enough that she knew every inch by memory. She retrieved her rifle from the closet, A, 30 to 30. Winchester her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12. It was loaded, she kept it that way, living alone this far from help. Not for people, usually, but for the occasional bear that got too curious about her chickens or the mountain lion she'd spotted twice in the past year. Moving to a different window, one that gave her a better angle on the access road, she peered through the edge of the curtain. The SUV was still there, just visible in the dying light. Too far away to see in details, but close enough to be deliberate. They weren't hiding. They wanted her to know they were watching. Vernice set the rifle within easy reach and returned to the documents on her table. She needed to understand what she had before she could decide what to do with it. Working by feel more than sight, she gathered all the papers and carried them to her bedroom, hiding them under the floorboards beneath her bed, a storage space her father had built for important papers and cash. The strongbox itself she left on the table. If someone came looking, let them find an empty box. The real evidence would be safe. She made herself wait until full dark before checking the window again. The SUV was gone. But that didn't mean they'd left. It meant they'd found a better position, or they'd seen enough for now. Sleep was impossible. Vernice lay in bed, fully clothed, the rifle beside her, listening to every sound the forest made. The cabin creaked and settled. An owl called from the ridge. Small animals moved through the underbrush outside. Normal sounds, but tonight every one of them made her pulse jump. Her mind kept returning to Julius Kaufmann's face in that photograph. The gentle smile, the wire-rimmed glasses. A man who'd done nothing wrong except work in a field that made him interesting to frightened bureaucrats looking for traitors behind every door. They'd framed him, arrested him, and killed him, made it look like suicide, closed the case and moved on, while his wife and daughter lived with the shame of it. And her father had known the truth. Had documented it, had tried to stop it and failed. Then he'd buried the evidence and built a life on top of it, teaching his daughter to love these mountains, to find peace in solitude, never telling her that beneath the beauty was a secret that had cost a good man his life. She must have dozed eventually, because dawn came as a surprise light, seeping through her curtains, the forest emerging from shadow into detail. Vernice rose stiffly, checked the windows. No vehicles visible, but that meant nothing. She made coffee and forced herself to eat, though her stomach protested. Then she retrieved the documents from their hiding place and spread them out again, this time reading more carefully, making notes. The surveillance operation had run from 1952 to 1954, at least according to these files. Dozens of people monitored, files built, lives invaded. Most of them were eventually cleared of suspicion and released, but 3 names had red stamps marked "Neutralized." Julius Kaufmann was one of them. The other 2 were a journalist named Sarah Roth and a labor organizer named Miguel Torres. Both had died in 1953, Roth in a car accident, Torres in what was ruled a mugging gone wrong. Her father's notes questioned both deaths. Too convenient, too clean, following pattern. A pattern of murder disguised as accidents and suicide. Vernice studied her father's handwriting in these. Notes urgent, sharp, unlike his usual careful script. He'd been scared when he wrote these. Scared and desperate to record what he knew before it was too late. The final document in the strongbox was a list of names without photographs or files attached. Just names and brief identifiers. Senior Field Director, Deputy Director Operations, Legal Counsel, Political Liaison. These were the people who'd run the operation, the ones who'd given the orders. One name had been circled multiple times, J.R.M., Senator J. Robert Morrison, currently serving Arizona, formerly Director of Domestic Intelligence Operations, Defense Department, 1951 to 1954. Vernice stared at that name. She knew who Senator Morrison was. Everyone in Arizona did. He was 89 years old, a decorated war hero, a respected elder statesman who'd served in Congress for 4 decades. His face was on murals in Flagstaff and Phoenix. Schools were named after him. And according to these documents, he'd overseen the murder of at least 3 innocent people. She needed help. This was too big for her to handle alone, too dangerous, too important. But who could she trust? The local sheriff? The FBI? The newspapers? Her father had tried going through official channels. Request denied. Proceed as ordered. The system had failed Julius Kaufman. It might fail her too. Vernice thought of Loretta Brennan, the librarian in Pinehaven. They'd known each other for 20 years, a friendship built on borrowed books and occasional coffee in town. Loretta was sharp, discreet, and before retiring to Arizona, she'd worked as a research librarian at the Library of Congress. If anyone could help figure out what to do with this information, it was her. But involving Loretta meant putting her at risk. And these people, whoever was watching from that SUV, they'd already shown they were willing to kill to keep secrets buried. Vernice stood at her window, looking out at the clearing where the Termite Mound had been. She'd filled in the hole, scattered pine needles over the disturbed earth. Within a few weeks, you wouldn't be able to tell anything had been dug up there. That's what they wanted her to do with these documents. Fill in the hole, scatter some dirt, pretend she'd never found anything. But she kept seeing Julius Kaufman's face. And behind his face, the faces of his wife and daughter, living their whole lives with a lie. Her father had spent 45 years as a coward, his own word from that deathbed conversation. He'd known the truth and buried it because he was too afraid to face the consequences of telling it. Vernice had never thought of herself as particularly brave. Jumping out of airplanes to fight wildfires, that was just a job, something she was trained to do. Real courage was facing your own fear, making the hard choice, even when it cost you everything. She'd been given a choice her father never gave himself. She could bury this again, go back to her quiet life, pretend ignorance. Or she could honor Julius Kaufman's memory and her father's conscience by finally telling the truth. The sound of an engine broke her concentration. She moved to the window quickly, rifle in hand. The SUV was back, pulling into her driveway this time. No attempt at concealment now. They were coming to her door. Vernice chambered around and waited. 2 men emerged from the SUV. They moved with the casual confidence of people who expected cooperation. Both wore civilian clothes, khakis and button-down shirts, but something about their bearing suggested military or law enforcement background. The taller one carried a briefcase. They didn't draw weapons. They simply walked to her porch and knocked. Vernice opened the door with the rifle visible but not pointed at anyone. "This is private property. State your business." The taller man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Talder? My name is Randall Pierce. This is my associate, Mr. Webb. We're with a private security consulting firm. We'd like to speak with you about some property that may have been discovered on your land. I don't know what you're talking about. May we come in? This conversation would be better conducted inside. We can talk fine from where we are." Pierce's smile faded slightly. "Miss Talder, we're not here to threaten you or cause problems. We're simply tasked with recovering certain materials that belong to our clients. Materials that should never have been buried on this property in the first place." "What clients?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but they're willing to compensate you generously for any inconvenience. Very generously." He held up the briefcase. "May I show you?" Vernice considered. These men weren't official, no badges, no government authority, no legal standing. They were hired muscle dressed in business casual, trying to buy her cooperation before moving to more aggressive tactics. "Show me from there," she said, gesturing with the rifle barrel. Pierce set the briefcase on the porch railing, opened it, and turned it to face her. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, neatly banded. $50,000, Pierce said, "for the strongbox and its contents. No questions asked. You keep the money, we take the materials, everyone goes back to their lives. And if I've already opened it, then we need to discuss what you saw and who you might have told." There it was, the threat wrapped in reasonable language. "I haven't told anyone," Vernice said, which was true, technically. "And I'm not interested in your money." Pierce exchanged a glance with Webb, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. Webb was broader, harder looking, with the flat eyes of someone who'd done worse things than pay people off. "Miss Talder, please think carefully. The materials in that box, if that's what you found, relate to sensitive historical matters, matters that are better left in the past. Bringing them to light now would hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt, families who've moved on, reputations that have been built over decades." "Julius Kaufman had a family too," Vernice said quietly. Pierce's expression hardened. "So you did read the files?" "Every word." "Then you know how complicated that situation was. Cold War tensions, national security considerations, difficult choices made by people trying to protect the country. They murdered an innocent man. Then they covered it up. There's nothing complicated about that." Webb spoke for the first time, his voice flat and cold. "You're an old woman, living alone on a mountain. Accidents happen. Houses catch fire. People fall. You should think very carefully about what you're doing." Vernice raised the rifle slightly, just enough to make the point. "You're standing on my property, threatening me. You should think carefully about what you're doing." Pierce held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Nobody's threatening anyone. My associate is simply pointing out realities. You're in a vulnerable position, Miss Talder. We're offering you a way out that benefits everyone. Get off my land. We can't leave empty-handed. Our clients won't accept that. Then tell your clients to come talk to me themselves. I'm done dealing with hired help." She stepped back and closed the door, locked it, and moved to the window to watch them. Pierce stood on the porch for a long moment, clearly debating his next move. Webb said something she couldn't hear. Finally, they returned to their SUV and drove away. But they'd be back, and next time they wouldn't bother with bribes. Vernice immediately went to work. She photographed every document with her phone, uploading the images to a cloud storage account she rarely used. It took nearly an hour. The signal was weak and the files were large, but eventually everything was backed up. Then she called Loretta. "Vernice, is everything all right? You never call this. Early. I need your help, research help, and I need you to keep this completely confidential." A pause. "You're scaring me a little." "I'm scared too. Can you meet me in town?" "The library." "I can be there in an hour." "Make it the coffee shop instead. More public." Another pause. Longer this time. "Vernice, what's going on?" "I'll explain when I see you. And Loretta, if something happens to me, if I don't show up, I'm sending you an email right now with some files. Open them and take them to the newspapers in Phoenix and Flagstaff. Every newspaper you can think of. Do you understand? You're really scaring me now. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand." Vernice ended the call and typed out an email to Loretta with links to the cloud storage files. She scheduled it to send automatically in 3 hours. If she didn't cancel it before then, Loretta would have everything. Then she grabbed her truck keys, the rifle, and a backpack with water and supplies. She wasn't naive enough to think Pierce and Webb were the only threat. If someone had been monitoring her property closely enough to notice the disturbed earth around the Termite Mound, they might have other people watching the roads. The drive to Pinehaven took 40 minutes down a winding mountain road. Vernice watched her mirrors constantly, but saw no one following. The town appeared quiet when she arrived. Main Street with its handful of shops, the library, the general store, the coffee shop where tourists stopped on their way to bigger attractions. She parked where she could see both entrances to the coffee shop and went inside. The place was nearly empty. A couple of locals she recognized by sight but not by name, and a young woman with a laptop in the corner. Loretta arrived 10 minutes later, her face tight with worry. She was 72, thin and spry, with white hair she kept short and practical. She'd been pretty once and still carried herself with grace. They sat in the back, the corner, away from the other patrons. "Tell me," Loretta said. Vernice told her. Not everything, not the details about her father, but enough. The strongbox, the documents, the Operation Skywatch files, Julius Kaufmann's murder, the men who'd come to her cabin with bribes and threats. Loretta listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Vernice finished, Loretta sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "You need to go to the authorities. The FBI, at minimum. My father tried that. It didn't work. That was 70 years ago. Things have changed." "Have they? Senator Morrison is still alive, still powerful, still protected by the same system that let him murder innocent people." Loretta looked out the window, thinking. "Finally," she said, "what do you want me to do?" "Help me find Julius Kaufmann's daughter. I need to know if she's still alive, and if she is, I need to talk to her." Loretta pulled out her phone and opened a genealogy database she subscribed to. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, years of research experience evident in how efficiently she navigated the system. Julius Kaufmann, died 1953, Arizona. Wife was Anna Kaufmann, Maidenname Hirsch. She died in 1967. Daughter, here it is, Pauline Kaufmann, born 1946. Married name Reeves. Still living, according to public records. Address in Flagstaff. You found that in 2 minutes? I'm very good at my job, Loretta said with a small smile, even retired. She wrote the address on a napkin and slid it across the table. What are you going to tell her? The truth, that her father was innocent, that he was murdered, that my father had proof but was too afraid to use it. That's going to destroy her understanding of her whole life. Living with a lie hasn't done her any favors either. Loretta folded, her hands on the table. What about you? What happens when you go public with this? I don't know, but those men who came to my cabin, they made it clear doing nothing isn't an option. They'll come back. I know. You can't stay at your cabin. It's too isolated, too vulnerable. Vernice had already considered that. I'll figure something out. Stay with me. I have a guest room. We're right in town, plenty of witnesses if anyone tries anything. I can't put you in danger. You already have. The minute you told me about this, I became involved. At least if you're staying with me, we can watch out for each other. Loretta's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Besides, I was a librarian at the Library of Congress for 30 years. You think I never dealt with sensitive information? I know how to keep secrets and how to protect them. Vernice felt a wave of gratitude that made her throat tight. She'd lived alone for so long, relied on herself so completely, that accepting help felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Loretta was right. She couldn't fight this alone. All right. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't survived this. Loretta checked her watch. It's 10:30 now. If we're going to Flagstaff to talk to Pauline Reeves, we should leave soon. It's a 2-hour drive. You're coming with me? Of course I'm coming with you. You think I'm going to let you do this alone? Loretta stood and gathered her things. Let's take my car. If those men are watching for your truck, they won't recognize mine. They left the coffee shop and walked to Loretta's sedan, parked half a block away. Vernice kept watching for the black SUV, but the street remained quiet. Either Pierce and Webb were regrouping, or they were watching from somewhere less obvious. The drive to Flagstaff took them down from the mountains into high desert country, then back up through pine forests. Loretta drove with steady confidence, while Vernice watched the mirrors and tried to organize her thoughts. What would she say to Pauline Reeves? How did you tell someone that their entire understanding of their father's death was a lie? That he hadn't been a traitor, hadn't killed himself in shame, but had been murdered by the government he'd served? You're quiet, Loretta said, thinking about what to say. Tell her the truth, simply and directly. Give her the evidence. Let her decide what to do with it. She might not believe me, might think I'm crazy or cruel. That's a risk, but keeping the truth from her is worse. Flagstaff appeared ahead, a town built on Route 66 history and Northern Arizona University students. Loretta followed the GPS to a residential neighborhood on the eastern edge of town, modest homes with well-kept yards, the kind of place where people raised families and retired quietly. Pauline Reeves's house was a single-story ranch with a neat lawn and flower beds. A Honda sedan sat in the driveway. Wind chimes hung from the porch, turning slowly in the breeze. Vernice sat in the car for a moment, gathering her courage. This was it, the point of no return. Once she spoke to Pauline, once she told the story, there would be no taking it back. "I'll wait here," Loretta said. "This conversation should be between you and her." Vernice nodded and got out of the car. She walked to the front door, her heart hammering, and knocked, footsteps inside. The door opened, revealing a woman in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun. She had her father's eyes. Vernice recognized them from the photograph. "Can I help you?" Pauline's voice was cautious but polite. "Mrs. Reeves, my name is Vernice Talder. I need to talk to you about your father, about what really happened to him in 1953. Pauline's face went pale. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "Who are you?" "My father worked for the government during the Cold War. He was involved in the investigation of your father, and he left documents proving that your father was innocent, that he was murdered." For a long moment, Pauline just stared at her. Then, quietly, "You'd better come inside." The house was comfortable and lived in, with family photographs on every wall. Grandchildren, from the look of them, a long life built on the foundation of a terrible lie. They sat in the living room, Pauline on the couch, Vernice in an armchair. On the coffee table between them, Vernice spread out printed copies of the key documents, the surveillance files, her father's notes, the evidence of fabrication, the photographs. Pauline looked at each one carefully, her hands trembling. When she reached the photograph of her father under surveillance, she made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp. "I was 7 when they took him," she said finally. "I remember men coming to our house. I remember my mother crying. They told us he was a spy, that he'd betrayed his country. My mother never recovered. She died believing he'd done something terrible. He didn't. According to these files, he was researching atmospheric radiation detection. He would have been able to detect the government's secret nuclear tests in Nevada. They framed him to stop him from exposing the tests." Pauline set down the photographs, her face wet with tears. "They killed him because he was a good scientist doing good work." "Yes." "And your father knew this? He documented it. He tried to report it through official channels. They threatened him into silence. So he buried the evidence and lived with the guilt for 45 years. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the truth. And because the people who did this, some of them are still alive, still protected, still powerful. If this stays buried, they get away with murder. Your father's memory stays tarnished, and justice never happens." Pauline wiped her eyes and looked at the documents again. "What do you want from me? Permission to tell your father's story, to make this public. It will be difficult. People will fight it. But your father deserves to be remembered for who he really was." Pauline stood and walked to the window, looking out at her quiet street. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she turned back. "My whole life, I've lived with the shame of what people said my father did. My children grew up never knowing their grandfather's real name because I changed it after I married. I built a life away from that shadow." Vernice's heart sank. She was going to refuse. But then Pauline continued, "And my whole life, I've known in my heart that something was wrong with the story they told us. My father wasn't a traitor. He was a kind man who loved his work and his family. Whatever they said he did, it never made sense." She picked up the photograph of her father. "Tell his story. Make them remember him the right way. I don't care what it costs." Vernice and Pauline spent another hour together, going through the documents in detail. Pauline asked questions about the surveillance program, about the arrest, about how her father had died. Vernice answered as honestly as she could, though many details remained unclear even in her father's careful notes. "There should be more," Vernice said finally. My father's notes reference photographs he took of the actual of your father's death scene, evidence that it was staged to look like suicide. But those photographs aren't in the strongbox. Where would they be? I don't know. He wrote that he hid them in the place only V knows. I'm V. Vernice, but I have no idea what place he meant. Pauline considered this. Maybe he meant to tell you and never got the chance. Or maybe he left some other clue. Maybe. Vernice stood to leave. I should go. I've taken enough of your time. Wait. Pauline went to a desk in the corner and pulled out a business card. This is my son's number. He's a lawyer in Phoenix. If you need legal help with any of this protection, advice, someone to navigate the system, call him. Tell him I sent you. He'll help. No. Thank you. Pauline's eyes were still wet, but her voice was steady. You gave me back my father's honor. Whatever happens now, that's worth everything. Vernice returned to Loretta's car with a sense of purpose stronger than fear. She'd made a promise to Pauline, and she intended to keep it. How did it go? Loretta asked. She wants the truth told. She gave me her son's number. He's a lawyer. That's something, at least. Loretta started the car. Where to now? Your house, like you offered. I need to think, plan the next steps. And I need to figure out what my father meant about hiding photographs. They drove back through the mountains, arriving in Pine Haven as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks. Loretta's house sat on a quiet street, 2 blocks from the library, a small cottage with a garden that showed years of attentive care. Inside, Loretta showed Vernice to the guest room and gave her towels and fresh linens. Make yourself at home. I'll start dinner. We can talk strategy over food. While Loretta cooked, Vernice sat at the kitchen table with her father's journal, reading through the entries again. The last several pages were written in the military cipher he'd taught her as a child, a simple substitution code, enough to keep casual readers from understanding, but nothing sophisticated enough to stop serious intelligence work. She decoded each entry methodically. Most repeated information she already knew: his growing horror at the operation, his attempts to document wrongdoing, his fear of reprisal. But near the end, there was something new. The 17th of July, 1953, have secured final evidence in place of safety, the place only V knows. If they come for me, if something happens, she'll be the one to find it. She's smart enough, brave enough, everything I'm not. The photographs are there, the full documentation, enough to hang everyone involved. But she has to want to find it, has to choose to look. I can't force that choice on her. Some burdens shouldn't be passed to children, but if she finds them on her own, if she's old enough and strong enough to understand, then maybe something good can come from this nightmare. V, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I tried to be brave and I failed, but I left you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. I love you. I'm proud of you. Dad, Vernice's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes and read the entry again. The place only V knows. She'd searched everywhere she could think of special spots from childhood, hiding places they'd shared, locations that held meaning. But she'd found nothing except that key in the bronze star case, which had led to the strongbox, unless the key wasn't the only thing hidden there. Loretta, I need to go back to my cabin. Loretta appeared in the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon in hand. Now? Is that safe? I think I know where the photographs are, or at least where to look for another clue. Then we'll both go. After we eat. You can't solve mysteries on an empty stomach. Dinner was simple pasta with vegetables, bread, salad from Loretta's garden. They ate quickly, discussing their next moves. Loretta suggested contacting journalists, maybe someone from the Arizona Republic or the Phoenix New Times. Vernice agreed, but wanted to have all the evidence first. As they finished eating, Vernice's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello? Miss Talder." It was Pierce's voice, smooth and controlled. "I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer. I'm not interested in your money." "I see. That's unfortunate. Tell me, have you spoken with anyone about what you found?" Vernice's stomach tightened. "Were they watching right now? Listening?" "That's none of your business." "Actually, it's very much our business. Our clients need to know the scope of the situation. If you've shared information with others, that complicates things considerably. Your clients can go to hell." "Miss Talder, please don't be rash. We're trying to resolve this quietly. But if you force our hand, if you go public with unverified allegations against respected public figures, you'll find yourself facing legal consequences. Defamation, theft of classified materials, interfering with national security, the list goes on. Those materials were buried on my property. That makes them mine. Actually, the classification markings make them government property, regardless of where they were found. You're in possession of stolen documents. That's a federal crime." Vernice felt the trap closing. He was right technically. She probably was in violation of some obscure law about classified materials. They could arrest her, confiscate everything, make it all disappear again. "I want to speak with your clients directly. No more intermediaries." Pierce was quiet for a moment. "That can be arranged. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. We'll pick you up." "No, public place, coffee, shop in Pinehaven, 10 o'clock. "That's acceptable. But Miss Talder, don't do anything foolish between now and then. Don't contact the press. Don't speak to lawyers. Don't share those documents with anyone. If you do, the meeting is off, and we proceed with less pleasant options. Understood? I'll be there." She ended the call and looked at Loretta. "They want a meeting tomorrow morning. You're not going alone." "I wasn't planning to, but first, we need to get those photographs. If I'm going to face whoever's behind this, I want every piece of evidence my father left behind." They drove to Vernice's cabin in darkness, headlights cutting through the mountain night. No other vehicles on the road, no signs of surveillance, but Vernice kept the rifle ready anyway. The cabin was undisturbed, exactly as she'd left it. Inside, she went straight to the bronze star on the wall and removed it from its frame. The felt backing she'd checked before yielded only the safety deposit key. But now she examined the frame itself more carefully. The wood was thicker than necessary, built by her father's hands with the same precision he brought to everything. She ran her fingers along the edges, feeling for irregularities. There a slight gap along one side. She worked her fingernail into it and felt the wood shift. Not solid, but hollow. Using a knife from her kitchen, she carefully pried apart the joined pieces. The frame came apart to reveal a hidden compartment, and inside, a second key, smaller than the first, attached to a slip of paper with an address in Flagstaff. A storage unit. Her father had rented a storage unit, probably decades ago, and maintained it through some automated payment system. The place only V knows, because only she would think to look inside the bronze star frame after finding the first key there. "Got it," she said, holding up the key. "What is it?" "Another storage location. In Flagstaff." Vernice looked at her watch. 9:30 at night. "Too late to go now. We'll have to wait until morning." "After your meeting with Pierce?" "No, before. I want that evidence in hand when I sit down with whoever's pulling his strings." They returned to Loretta's house and tried to sleep, though neither managed more than a few restless hours. Dawn came grey and cold, the sky threatening rain. At 7 o'clock, they were in the car heading back to Flagstaff. The storage facility was on the outskirts of Flagstaff, one of those anonymous complexes with rows of identical orange doors and keypad security. The address on the slip of paper led them to Unit 147, second row from the back. Vernice's hands shook slightly as she fitted the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, as if recently oiled. The door rolled up with a metallic rattle. Inside, the unit was small, maybe 5 feet by 10, and nearly empty. A single cardboard box sat in the center, carefully sealed with tape that had yellowed with age, but remained intact. Vernice lifted the box, surprisingly light, and carried it outside, where the morning sun provided better light. She used her pocket knife to cut through the tape and opened the flaps. Inside were 3 items: a manila envelope thick with photographs, a cassette tape labeled the 14th of June 1953 full recording, and a handwritten letter addressed to Vernice. She opened the letter first. Her father's handwriting, shaky but legible, dated December 1997, just months before his death. Vernice, if you're reading this, you found both keys. You were always smart, always persistent. I'm proud of that, even though I know this discovery will hurt you. What's in this box is the full truth of what happened to Julius Kaufmann and at least 2 other innocent people. The photographs show the staging of Kaufmann's death. The tape recording is my interview with him 2 days before he died, conducted without authorization. He explains his research, proves his innocence, names the people who framed him. I was ordered to destroy this recording. I kept it instead. The reason I never came forward, the reason I buried all of this, it wasn't just cowardice, though that was part of it. They threatened you, Vernie. You were 16 years old, starting to think about college. They told me if I spoke out, you'd be the one who paid. Not me. You. Accidents happen to teenage girls, they said. Cars crash. Bad things happen to families of traitors. So I kept quiet. I buried the evidence, and I spent every day of the rest of my life hating myself for it. But you stayed safe. You grew up, became strong, built a good life. That had to be enough. Now, I'm dying, and you're an adult and strong enough to make your own choices. If you want to bury this again, I'll understand. But if you want to fight, if you want to give Julius Kaufmann and the others the justice I never could, then you have everything you need. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. I'm sorry I chose your safety over the truth. Maybe that makes me a bad man, but I'd make the same choice 1,000 times if it kept you alive. I love you. I'm so sorry. Dad. Vernice's vision blurred. She read the letter twice more, her father's words reshaping everything she'd thought about his silence. He hadn't been protecting himself. He'd been protecting her. Vernice? Loretta's voice was gentle. Are you all right? He did it for me. All of it. The silence, the guilt, the isolation. They threatened to kill me if he talked. Loretta put a hand on her shoulder. That's what parents do. They sacrifice themselves for their children. But I lived my whole adult life thinking he was just damaged by the war, distant, unable to connect. And all that time, he was carrying this to keep me safe. He loved you. That's clear in every word. Vernice set the letter aside carefully and picked up the manila envelope. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs, 8x10s, professionally processed. The images were horrifying in their clarity. Julius Kaufmann in a cell, face bruised, one eye swollen shut. Kaufmann's body on a cot, rope marks on his neck that didn't match the supposed hanging position. 2 men in suits examining the cell, clearly staging the scene. Close-ups of documents being placed in Kaufmann's personal effects after his death, documents he'd never seen while alive. Her father had documented the entire murder and cover-up with cold, professional precision. The cassette tape was even more damning. Loretta had a portable cassette player in her car. She still listened to audiobooks on tape sometimes. They played the recording sitting in the parking lot, windows rolled up for privacy. Her father's voice, younger but recognizable. This interview is being conducted without authorization on the 14th of June 1953, with Dr. Julius Kaufmann, currently in federal custody. Dr. Kaufmann, can you state your research focus for the record? Kaufmann's voice, strained but steady. I've been developing atmospheric, radiation detection systems. The goal is to identify nuclear test signatures from anywhere in the world, early warning capabilities. And what have you discovered in your research? that there have been several unauthorized nuclear tests in Nevada over the past 18 months. Tests that weren't disclosed to the public or to oversight committees. Tests that released significant radiation into populated areas. Why do you believe you were arrested? Because I was going to publish. I had the data, the proof. I was scheduled to present at a conference in Chicago. Instead, they arrested me, claimed I was passing secrets to Soviet agents. It's all fabricated. I've never had contact with any foreign intelligence service. Do you know who ordered your arrest? I was told it came from the Director of Domestic Intelligence Operations, J. Robert Morrison. He personally approved the charges against me. The tape continued for another 30 minutes, Kaufman detailing his research, naming names, providing specific dates and locations of undisclosed nuclear tests, evidence of government cover-ups, illegal testing, radiation exposure to American civilians. No wonder they'd killed him. This wasn't about communism or national security. It was about crimes against the American people, covered up at the highest levels. When the tape ended, Loretta sat in stunned silence. Finally, she said, "This is bigger than we thought. This isn't just about one man's murder. It's about government-sanctioned poisoning of civilians. And Senator Morrison was in charge of it all. He's still alive, still influential. This will destroy him." "Good." Vernice's voice was hard. "It should." They drove back toward Pinehaven in heavy silence, the box of evidence on the back seat. Vernice checked her watch, 8:30, an hour and a half before the meeting with Pierce and whoever he was representing. Except the meeting never happened. As they approached Pinehaven, they saw smoke rising from the center of town. Fire trucks blocked Main Street. People stood on sidewalks, watching. Loretta's house was burning. They parked as close as they could and ran toward the scene. Firefighters were already at work, but the cottage was engulfed, flames shooting through the roof. Neighbors stood in clusters, some crying, some just staring. Vernice grabbed Loretta's arm. "Your house, it's just a house." But Loretta's voice shook. "We're alive. That's what matters." Tom Vasquez from the general store approached them, his face grim. "Loretta, thank God you're all right. The fire chief thinks it was arson. Someone broke in through the back door, spread accelerant. If you'd been inside, we weren't," Loretta said firmly. Vernice's phone rang. "Pierce's number." She answered. "Did you do this?" "Miss Talder, I'm disappointed you didn't take our offer seriously. The fire at your friend's house should demonstrate how serious we are. Next time, people won't be so lucky. You burned down her house because I wouldn't sell you documents. We burned down her house because you went to Flagstaff yesterday. Because you spoke with Pauline Reeves. Because you refused to keep this quiet like a sensible person." His voice was cold now, the reasonable facade gone. "Our 10 o'clock meeting is cancelled. Instead, you're going to bring us everything your father hid, all of it, including whatever you found in that storage unit this morning, and you're going to hand it over without copies, without backups, without telling anyone else what you know. Or what? Or we'll burn down more than houses. Your friend, Loretta, Pauline Reeves and her family, anyone you've spoken to, anyone who might have heard even a whisper of this story. We'll erase every trace, just like we erased Julius Kaufman." Vernice's blood ran cold. "You're admitting to murder." "I'm explaining reality to someone who doesn't seem to understand how the world works. These documents stay buried. That's not negotiable. The only question is whether more people die before you accept that. Where do you want to meet?" "Your cabin. Noon today. Bring everything. Come alone. If we see any law enforcement, any journalists, anyone at all with you, people start dying." The call ended. Vernice stood in the smoke-filled street, watching Loretta's life burn, understanding now the full weight of what her father had carried for 45 years. They would kill anyone to keep these secrets. Her father had known that. That's why he'd stayed silent. But silence hadn't protected Julius Kaufman's family. It hadn't protected the civilians exposed to radiation from secret nuclear tests. It had only protected the people responsible. Her father had made his choice. He'd chosen her safety over the truth. Now she had to make hers. And whatever she decided, people were going to die. Vernice pulled Loretta away from the burning house, away from the crowd and the smoke, to where they could talk privately by Loretta's car. "I need you to do something for me," Vernice said quietly. "I need you to take these documents, all of them, and get them to someone who can use them. A journalist, a lawyer, the FBI. I don't care who, as long as they're legitimate and willing to publish. You're planning to meet them at your cabin. I don't have a choice. If I don't show up, they'll start killing people. They've already proven they will. Then I'm coming with you. No, you're taking the evidence to safety. That's the only way this works." Vernice held up her father's letter. "My father stayed silent to protect me. I understand that now, but his silence didn't stop the people responsible. It just postponed the reckoning. I won't make that same mistake." "They'll kill you, Vernice." "Maybe, but if you get the evidence out, if you make sure it's published, no matter what happens to me, then at least some good comes from all this. Julius Kaufman gets his name cleared. The truth comes out. That's worth the risk." Loretta's eyes filled with tears. "You're asking me to let you sacrifice yourself." "I'm asking you to make sure my sacrifice matters." Vernice pressed the box into Loretta's hands. "Drive to Phoenix. Not Flagstaff, they might be watching for you there. Phoenix. Find Pauline Reeves's son, the lawyer. Give him everything. Tell him the whole story. He'll know what to do. What will you tell them when you show up empty-handed? That I hid the evidence somewhere, they'll never find it. That if anything happens to me, or anyone else, it gets released automatically. I'll bluff, buy time. Hope they believe me long enough for you to get the real evidence to safety. That's not a plan. That's a prayer." Sometimes prayers are all we have. They stood there for a moment, two women in their 60s and 70s, suddenly facing violence and danger neither of them had anticipated. Vernice thought about her father building this cabin, creating a refuge from the world, trying to protect his daughter from the consequences of his choices. She couldn't protect everyone, but she could give them a chance. "Go," she said to Loretta. "Now, before they realize you have the evidence." Loretta hugged her fiercely. "If you die because of this, I'll never forgive you. If I die, make sure the story gets told. That's all I ask." Loretta got in her car, placed the box carefully on the passenger seat, and drove away. Vernice watched until the car disappeared around the corner, heading toward the highway that would take her to Phoenix. Then she turned to Tom Vasquez, who'd been waiting at a respectful distance. "Tom, I need a favor. Can I borrow your phone? Mine's about to die and I need to make some calls." He handed it over, without question. Small-town courtesy, trusting your neighbors even when things made no sense. Vernice walked away from the crowd and called Pauline Reeves. "Mrs. Reeves, it's Vernice Talder. I need you to listen carefully. Some people are trying to stop me from releasing the information about your father. They've already burned down a friend's house. They're threatening to hurt you and your family if I don't hand over the evidence." Pauline's voice was steady despite the news. "What do you need me to do?" "Take your family somewhere safe. Today, right now. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Stay there until you hear from me or until this is all over. A woman named Loretta Brennan is bringing documents to your son in Phoenix. He needs to get them published immediately. Every newspaper, every news station, everything he can think of. Do you understand?" "I understand. My son will handle it. But what about you?" "I'm meeting these people at my cabin. I'm going to try to convince them I have insurance, that the evidence will be released if they hurt anyone. With luck, they'll believe me long enough for your son to get the story out." "That's not insurance. That's suicide. Your father died for the truth. The least I can do is risk my life for it." A long pause. Then Pauline said, "Be careful, and thank you. Whatever happens, thank you." Vernice ended the call and returned the phone to Tom. "Thank you. I need to go now. Vernice, what's going on? That fire wasn't an accident, was it? No, it wasn't. And if anyone asks about me, tell them you haven't seen me since this morning. She walked to her truck, parked 2 blocks away from the fire, and drove out of town. Not toward her cabin, not yet. She had 90 minutes before the meeting, and she needed to prepare. First stop, a hardware store in a larger town 15 miles away. She bought a burner phone, prepaid, paying cash. Then she drove to a coffee shop with public Wi-Fi and uploaded copies of everything from her phone to multiple cloud storage accounts. She sent the access codes to 3 different email addresses, one to Loretta, one to Pauline's son, and one to a journalist at the Arizona Republic whose name she'd found online. If she died today, at least the evidence would survive. Next, she recorded a video on the burner phone. Just her face, speaking directly to the camera, explaining everything, the strongbox, the documents, her father's role, Julius Kaufman's murder, Senator Morrison's involvement, Pierce's threats, the burned house. She uploaded that video to yet another cloud account with instructions to release it automatically if she didn't check in within 24 hours. It wasn't much of an insurance policy, but it was something. By 11 o'clock, she was back in her truck, driving up the mountain road toward her cabin. The familiar landscape passed by pine trees, rock outcroppings, the turnoff where deer always grazed in the evenings. She'd lived here most of her adult life, found peace in these mountains, built a solitary existence that asked nothing of anyone. Now that peace was shattered, and the solitude that had protected her made her vulnerable, she arrived at her cabin at 11:45. Pierce's black SUV was already there, parked in her clearing. 2 other vehicles sat beside it. More men, more muscle, more threat. Vernice parked her truck and got out slowly, hands visible, showing she wasn't armed. Her rifle was in the cabin, useless to her now anyway. This wasn't a fight she could win with weapons. Pierce emerged from her cabin. They'd broken in while waiting, followed by Webb and 3 other men. All of them wore the same casual business attire, the same confident expressions of people accustomed to getting what they wanted. But there was one more person with them, and this one made Vernice's blood run cold. An elderly man in his late 80s, moving slowly but with undimmed authority. Silver hair, expensive suit, a face she recognized from news broadcasts and campaign posters. Senator J. Robert Morrison. He'd come personally to clean up his mess. "Miss Talder," Morrison said, his voice surprisingly strong for his age. "I understand you've been making quite a nuisance of yourself, digging up old stories that should have stayed buried. Stories about murder and cover-ups? Yes, I have. Murder is such an ugly word. We were protecting national security during a very dangerous time. Difficult decisions had to be made. Julius Kaufman wasn't a threat to national security. He was a threat to your illegal nuclear testing program." Morrison smiled, cold and thin. "You sound just like your father. Same righteous indignation, same naive belief that the truth matters more than stability. I had such high hopes that he'd learn his place. Instead, he betrayed his oath and his country. He documented your crimes. That's not betrayal. That's conscience. And where did his conscience get him? 45 years of guilt and isolation. He died a broken man, Miss Talder. Is that really the legacy you want for yourself?" Pierce stepped forward. "Senator, perhaps we should move this inside, away from potential observers." They herded her into her own cabin. Morrison took her father's chair, a deliberate insult. The other men positioned themselves by the windows and door. "Now then," Morrison said, settling into the chair with the ease of someone comfortable with power. "Let's discuss the documents. Pierce tells me you've been uncooperative about returning government property. They're not government property. They're evidence of crimes. Evidence that's 70 years old and completely unverifiable. My word against the scribblings of a disgraced field agent who spent his life hiding in the mountains. Who do you think people will believe?" I think they'll believe the tape recording of Julius Kaufman explaining his research. I think they'll believe the photographs of his staged suicide. I think they'll believe documentary proof that you ordered the murder of American citizens to cover up illegal nuclear testing. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Concern, maybe even fear. If such evidence existed, he said carefully, which I doubt, it would be extremely dangerous for anyone possessing it. Federal charges, prison time, perhaps even accidents before trial. The system protects itself, Miss Talder. It always has. The evidence exists, and it's already in motion. Even if you kill me right now, it won't stop what's coming. I don't believe you. Then you're making a mistake. I'm not my father. I didn't spend 45 years hiding the truth out of fear. I've given copies to multiple people with instructions to release everything if I don't check in. You have, she checked her watch, about 12 hours before the story breaks everywhere. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one. Morrison studied her face, and she met his gaze without flinching. Let him see the truth in her eyes, not the truth of what she'd said, but the truth of her determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. Finally, Morrison turned to Pierce. Search her, search the cabin, find the originals. If she's bluffing about having distributed copies, we still have time to contain this. The men moved efficiently, pulling out drawers, checking under furniture, going through her belongings with professional thoroughness. They found the empty strongbox. They found her father's journal. But the photographs, the tape, the key documents, all of those were in Loretta's car, heading toward Phoenix. Pierce approached Morrison after 20 minutes of searching. Nothing, sir. She must have hidden them elsewhere. Morrison's jaw tightened. Miss Talder, I'm going to give you one more chance. Tell me where the originals are. Tell me who has copies, and I'll ensure your safety and the safety of your friends. Otherwise what? You'll kill me, kill Loretta, kill Pauline Reeves and her entire family? Vernice's voice was calm, almost casual. Do it. Kill us all. It won't change anything. The evidence is already with journalists and lawyers. Your threats are meaningless now. Morrison stood slowly. You stupid, foolish woman. You have no idea what you've done. I've given Julius Kaufman justice. I've exposed crimes that should never have been hidden, and I've honored my father's memory by finishing what he started. Your father was a coward and a traitor. My father was a good man trapped in an impossible situation by bad men like you. He documented the truth because he knew someday it would matter. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded to Pierce. Get me out of here. We need to start damage control immediately. What about her? Leave her. If what she says is true, killing her only confirms the story. They left her standing in her cabin, Morrison moving with surprising speed for his age, the other men following like a well-trained detail. Vernice watched through the window as they loaded into their vehicles and drove away, dust rising behind them on the dirt road. For a moment, she just stood there, adrenaline draining away, leaving her shaky and exhausted. She'd bluffed her way through a confrontation with a man who'd ordered murders decades ago and gotten away with it. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. But the danger wasn't over. Morrison would be making calls right now, mobilizing lawyers and publicists, and whatever other resources he had to contain the damage. If Loretta hadn't reached Phoenix yet, if the evidence hadn't been delivered to Pauline's son, her phone rang. The burner she'd bought that morning. Hello? Miss Talder? This is David Reeves. My mother gave me your information. I'm here with Loretta Brennan. We have the documents and recordings. Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to sit down. Thank God. I've reviewed everything. This is... He paused, clearly struggling for words. This is extraordinary. Horrifying, but extraordinary. I've already contacted 3 major news organizations. They're sending people to interview us right now. This will be national news by tonight. Morrison knows it's coming. He'll try to stop you. Let him try. Once this gets published, there's no putting it back in the box. My mother is here with me. She wants to speak with you. Pauline's voice came on the line. Vernice, are you all right? David told me what you did, confronting those men alone. I'm fine. Shaken, but fine. They left without... She stopped, listening. A helicopter sound, distant, but growing closer. Vernice, are you there? I have to go. Thank you. Thank your son. Make sure the story gets told. She ended the call and went to the window. A helicopter was approaching from the south, flying low over the trees. Not a news helicopter, this one was black, unmarked, moving with purpose. They'd sent someone else. Someone who didn't care about Morrison's political calculations or the risk of confirming the story. Someone tasked with eliminating the witness before she could talk to reporters. Vernice grabbed her rifle and ran out the back door. Into the forest she knew better than anyone alive. If they wanted her dead, they'd have to catch her first. The helicopter passed overhead, circling her cabin. She heard it land in the clearing, heard men's voices shouting orders, at least 4 of them, maybe more. She moved through the trees, using skills learned in 20 years as a smoke jumper, reading terrain, moving quietly, using cover. The forest this time of year was thick with undergrowth, providing concealment but slowing movement. She headed uphill, toward the ridge, where she kept emergency supplies cached in an old fire lookout tower. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit. They weren't bothering with stealth. They were using numbers and equipment to flush her out. Vernice reached a small clearing and paused to catch her breath. She was 67 years old, fit but not young. She couldn't outrun these men indefinitely. She needed a different strategy. The old fire tower stood another half-mile up the ridge, built in the 1950 seconds and abandoned decades ago. She'd explored it as a child, climbed it as an adult to maintain the ladder and platform. From the top, she could see for miles in every direction. It was defensible only one way up, and she had the rifle. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the burn in her legs and lungs. The tower emerged from the trees ahead, its metal framework rust-spotted but still solid. She climbed quickly, the ladder rungs familiar under her hands. The observation cabin at the top was small, maybe 8 feet square, with windows on all sides. She could see her cabin below, smoke rising from where they'd set something on fire, probably destroying any remaining evidence they could find. Too late. The real evidence was already in Phoenix, already being copied and distributed to news organizations. She checked her rifle. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Not much, but enough if she had to make a stand. Through the western window, she saw movement in the trees below. 3 men, spreading out, searching methodically. They knew she was up here somewhere. It was only a matter of time. Vernice pulled out her burner phone and called David Reeves again. Whatever happens to me in the next few hours, make sure you tell the reporters everything. Don't let them soft-pedal it. Don't let them bury it on page 12. This is front-page news. Murder, cover-up, a senator who killed innocent people. Make them tell the whole story. Miss Talder, where are you? What's happening? Just promise me. The whole story. No matter what. I promise. But please, get somewhere safe. I am safe. For now. Just keep your promise. She ended the call and settled in to wait. The afternoon sun slanted through the tower windows. Below, the men were converging on her position. Whatever happened next, Julius Kaufman would get his justice. That had to be enough. The first man reached the base of the tower at 3:15. Vernice watched him circle it, radio to his companions, examine the ladder. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, moving with military precision. He started climbing. Vernice aimed the rifle at the ladder top. That's far enough. Come up here and I'll shoot you. The man stopped, hanging on the ladder, maybe 20 feet below her. Miss Talder, we're not here to hurt you. We're here to bring you in safely for questioning. Questioning about what? I haven't committed any crimes. You're in possession of classified materials. That's a federal offense. Come down peacefully, and this can all be resolved through proper channels. Like Julius Kaufman was resolved? Like the other people your employers murdered? The man's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just following orders. So was my father. It didn't make what he did. Right. Below, the other men had gathered at the tower's base. She counted 5 total, all armed, all watching the ladder, waiting to see how this played out. Then she heard another sound, different from the helicopter. Car engines, multiple vehicles, approaching fast on the access road. The men below heard it too. They turned, weapons raised, forming a defensive perimeter around the tower. But the vehicles that emerged from the trees weren't more mercenaries. They were marked Sheriff's Department SUVs, followed by unmarked sedans, and Vernice's heart leapt news vans with satellite equipment. David Reeves had called the cavalry. The sheriff's vehicles blocked the access road. Deputies emerged with weapons drawn, shouting orders. The men around the tower hesitated, caught between their mission and the reality of law enforcement witnesses. One of the news crews was already filming. The man on the ladder looked up at Vernice, his face resigned. This wasn't supposed to happen this way. No, it was supposed to be quiet, neat, just another old woman who had an accident. Vernice kept the rifle trained on him. Climb down, slowly. Tell your friends to drop their weapons. He descended, and after a tense standoff, the 5 men surrendered to the sheriff's deputies. Vernice watched from the tower as they were disarmed and handcuffed, as the news crews captured everything, as her impossible gamble somehow succeeded. A familiar voice called up from below. "Vernice, it's Sheriff Holbrook. You can come down now." Bill Holbrook had been sheriff of the county for 15 years, a decent man who'd always treated her with respect on the rare occasions their paths crossed. She trusted him as much as she trusted anyone in an official capacity. Vernice slung the rifle over her shoulder and climbed down carefully, her legs shaking from adrenaline and exertion. Holbrook met her at the bottom, steadying her when she stumbled on the last rung. "You all right, ma'am?" "I've been better. How did you know to come?" "We got calls from Phoenix, a lawyer named Reeves, and someone from the Arizona Republic. They said you were in danger, that people were trying to kill you to cover up some old government crimes." Sounded crazy, but the evidence they sent was pretty convincing. A woman in her 30s approached, microphone in hand, camera operator behind her. "Miss Talder? I'm Rachel Yost with Channel 8 News. Can you tell us what happened here?" Vernice looked at the camera, thought about her father spending 45 years in silence, thought about Julius Kaufman's daughter living with shame that was never warranted. 70 years ago, the government murdered an innocent man to cover up illegal nuclear testing. They threatened my father into silence when he tried to expose the truth. Today, I'm making sure that truth finally comes to light. Rachel's eyes widened. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" "Photographs, recordings, documents, everything you need to prove it." Senator J. Robert Morrison, currently serving in Congress, was directly responsible. He ordered the murder of Dr. Julius Kaufman and at least 2 other innocent people. All the evidence has been provided to multiple news organizations. The camera kept rolling. Vernice could see other crews setting up, more journalists arriving. This was going to be everywhere by tonight: cable news, newspapers, social media. The story her father had buried was about to explode into public consciousness. Morrison would deny it, his lawyers would fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming, and now it was public. He couldn't make this disappear with threats and fires and hired mercenaries. Sheriff Holbrook cleared his throat. "Miss Talder, I'm going to need you to come to the station. We have a lot of questions about what happened here, and federal authorities are on their way." "Am I under arrest?" "No, ma'am. You're a witness. And from what I understand, you might have just exposed one of the biggest cover-ups in Arizona history." Vernice looked back at her cabin, visible through the trees. Smoke had stopped rising from it, but she could see broken windows, disturbed earth around the foundation. They'd torn through her home looking for evidence, destroying her sanctuary in the process. But sanctuaries built on secrets weren't really safe anyway. She'd learned that from her father. "All right," she said to Holbrook. "Let's go. I have a long story to tell." 3 weeks later, Vernice stood in the clearing where the Termite Mound had been, watching sunrise paint the ponderosa pines gold and crimson. The hole had been filled, grass seed planted, and already new growth was emerging. Nature had a way of healing itself, given time. The cabin was a different story. The damage from the search had been extensive, but repairable. Tom Vasquez and a dozen other people from Pinehaven had shown up 2 days after the news broke, bringing tools and lumber and the kind of quiet competence that characterized mountain communities. They'd fixed the broken windows, repaired the torn-up floorboards, restored her sanctuary without asking for payment or explanation. "We take care of our own," Tom had said simply. Loretta's house was being rebuilt too, funded by donations that had poured in once people understood what had happened. She was staying with Vernice in the meantime, 2 women who'd become something more than friends through shared danger, family maybe, of the kind you chose rather than inherited. The news coverage had been everything Vernice had hoped for and more. The story had gone national within hours, then international. Senator Morrison's face had been on every news channel, his denials growing weaker as more evidence emerged. He'd resigned from the Senate after 3 days, citing health reasons, but criminal investigations were already underway. The 5 men who'd tried to capture her at the tower had been arrested on charges ranging from trespassing to attempted kidnapping. Pierce and Webb were missing, probably fled to some country without extradition treaties. The helicopter's registration had traced back to a shell company, and federal investigators were following that trail through layers of corporate misdirection. But it was Julius Kaufman's story that had captured public imagination. The gentle physicist murdered for trying to expose illegal nuclear testing. His daughter Pauline had been interviewed extensively, finally able to speak openly about her father's innocence. The government had issued a formal apology and posthumous exoneration. Kaufman's name would be added to a memorial for victims of government overreach. Vernice's phone rang. It rang constantly now. Journalists and book publishers and documentary filmmakers all wanting to tell her story. She'd learned to ignore most of them. But this call was from David Reeves, so she answered. "Miss Talder, I wanted to let you know the civil suit against Morrison's estate has been filed. My mother is seeking damages for decades of defamation against her father's name. Win or lose, it keeps the story in the public eye." "How is your mother?" "Better than I've seen her in years. She says it's like a weight has been lifted. She can finally talk about her father without shame." He paused. "She'd like to visit you, if you're willing. She wants to thank you in person. Tell her she's welcome anytime. And David, thank you for everything. We should be thanking you. You risked your life to clear my grandfather's name." After the call ended, Vernice walked to her father's workshop and pulled out the strongbox, now empty except for one item, his final letter to her. She'd read it dozens of times, memorizing every word, understanding finally the impossible choice he'd made. He'd sacrificed the truth to protect her. She'd sacrificed her safety to honor the truth. Both choices had cost something, but at least hers had accomplished what he'd wanted all along, justice for Julius Kaufman. She found herself speaking to him the way she'd done sometimes in the years after his death. "I understand now, Dad. Why you stayed quiet, what you gave up for me. I wish you'd told me. I wish you'd trusted me to make my own choice. But I know you did what you thought was right." The morning breeze moved through the pines, carrying the scent of resin and earth. Not an answer, but acknowledgement of sorts. That evening, Pauline Reeves arrived with her son and grandchildren. They sat on Vernice's newly repaired porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Pauline's grandchildren played in the clearing, their laughter echoing through the trees. "My father would have loved this," Pauline said quietly, watching the children. "He was always so gentle with me when I was small, patient, kind, the opposite of what they said he was." "People see what they're told to see," Vernice replied. "Your father was exactly who you remember. The lie was everything else. Do you think it was worth it? Everything you went through, the danger, the loss of your privacy, was it worth it to tell the truth?" Vernice considered the question. She'd lost her solitude, her anonymity, the simple peace of mountain life. She'd gained national attention she didn't want, ongoing legal obligations as a witness in multiple cases, and the knowledge that powerful people had tried to kill her. But Julius Kaufmann's name was cleared. Pauline could finally speak proudly of her father. The illegal nuclear testing program had been exposed, leading to new investigations and compensation for affected families. And her own father's memory had been transformed from shame to tragic heroism. A man who documented crimes he couldn't stop, then left evidence for someone braver to use. "Yes," she said finally, "it was worth it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Inside the cabin, Loretta was preparing dinner, humming something cheerful and slightly off-key. The sound made Vernice smile. Her sanctuary wasn't as solitary anymore, but perhaps that was growth rather than loss. Later that night, after everyone had left and Loretta had gone to bed, Vernice stood in the clearing one last time. The termite mound was truly gone now. Nothing left but disturbed earth that would soon be indistinguishable from the forest floor around it. Some secrets stayed buried forever. Some were meant to be found. Her father had built this cabin on top of hidden truth, trying to create peace through silence. She'd destroyed that silence and found a different kind of peace, the kind that came from honoring the dead by speaking for them. She walked back inside, locked the door, and looked at the bronze star hanging on the wall. No more hidden compartments, no more keys to mystery, just a medal that honored a complicated man who'd made difficult choices and lived with the consequences. Tomorrow she'd work on her garden, repair the fence, maybe start writing down her story for the book several publishers had requested. Normal work, honest work, the kind that healed rather than hid. But tonight, she'd sleep soundly for the first time in weeks, knowing that Julius Kaufmann could rest in peace, that her father's conscience had finally been vindicated, and that sometimes, despite everything, the truth did matter more than silence. The past was finally past, and she could move forward.